I remember sitting in that chair in dim sum and looking around and being like, this is what white kids must feel like all the time in school. And that was just startling to me because I think it reminded me I am part of a minority, but there are so many of us out there. Thank you for having me. My grandpa was born in Hong Kong, and he grew up there. And my grandma was born in Canada, but she's also from Hong Kong and has lived for quite some time in Hong Kong. Early on, they had my dad, who was born in Toronto, Canada. And then I think when he was about 2 years old, they emigrated to New Jersey and then to Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. You know, growing up, identifying then as a cisgender girl, I would always be asked to wear dresses or stereotypically feminine clothes for events such as weddings or, in my case, piano recitals. And a lot of times, you know, I would throw tantrums because that was the only dialogue that I had. I didn't have the correct terminology to describe my gender identity when I was like 4 or 5. Because of those tantrums, my mom realized clearly I was not connecting to stereotypically feminine clothes, and an option that she offered me was to, instead of wear a dress, wear these traditional Chinese outfits that my grandma had made. And these are very androgynous appearing. They're just kind of button up, silky, beautiful like garments that my grandma would sew. And so as a result, a lot of the clothes that I wore to formal events growing up were these Chinese garments. And I've always had this positive connection with Chinese clothes because it, in my mind, started to be this loophole. Instead of wearing feminine clothes, I was able to wear this. And this was something I was much more comfortable in. The town that I grew up in central Pennsylvania, is called Mechanicsburg. It's not the prettiest name, but it's, you know, not a lot around here. It's very predominantly white. Asian Americans are definitely the minority in this area, as many areas are. Growing up being Asian in this area was to face so many microaggressions. I was privileged that I did not face any physical violence. I think that there was more little verbal remarks in my case, such as, "You are my Asian best friend," is something I would get all the time. I wouldn't ever be called someone's best friend, period. It was always, I had to be someone's Asian best friend. And I always wondered why they had to throw that race in front of it before they called me their best friend. That's unnecessary. There was also other remarks of, you know, people coming up to me and pulling their eyes out like that and just laughing and walking away. And it was just this, you know, reminder that they saw me as something else, something different, that obviously in their opinion wasn't a positive thing, which always made me feel ashamed of who I was on some level. Growing up, I definitely had a warped view of what racism was. For me, racism was something that was violent and obvious. If someone were to physically beat me up because I was Asian, I would see that as racist. Whereas when I was called Asian best friend, it was by people who I trusted, you know, people who I loved. Something I wish that I told my younger self at the time experiencing racism was that racism is not always a conscious choice. Racism can come from people you love. Racism can come from people of color. Racism does not have to be violent. I was already being othered by my race being used in a negative context. This feeling of otherness has been... I'm trying to think of... Sorry, I'm putting my words together. throughout my life growing up, I have felt othered in so many ways. I have felt othered through my disability. I was deaf, but I could also hear. I felt othered through my sexuality. I didn't like boys or girls or just non-binary people. I couldn't figure out who I liked. I felt othered by that. I felt othered with my race. I wasn't completely Chinese. I wasn't completely Jewish. With my gender, of course, I didn't have the terminology to describe this, but I didn't feel like I could be a trans man or a cis girl. I felt somewhere other. And I always felt invalidated because of this. There is a lack of validation when you feel othered because you feel as if there is no place for you. And isolation begins to kick in then. And I believe the key to realizing that you do not have to feel othered is to find your own representation, not only within yourself, but within your communities, and realize that just like you, there are so many people out there that feel othered because of definitions that don't completely suit them. I just remember always meeting up with a large group of my family to go to dim sum and sitting at that classic circular table, having these incredible lighthearted conversations and just being able to connect with everyone, and looking around the restaurant and not seeing a single white person. Like, everyone in that room would be Asian, and I just remember those distinct moments were the only moments that I felt I blended in, appearance-wise. And I remember sitting in that chair in dim sum and looking around and being like, this is what white kids must feel like all the time in school. And that was just startling to me because I think it reminded me, I am part of a minority, but there are so many of us out there. Another revelation that I had when I was realizing I always felt othered was that all my identities, as I said, are on a continuum. So rather than being outside of this space, outside of what is normal, it was just on this continuum. I wasn't somewhere else on some faraway planet. I was still here with everyone else. So overall, being Asian American, just like being deaf, being queer taught me, being Jewish taught me to acknowledge that life was going to be this way, that life is not always fair, but then persevere and connect with the people that I love and the communities that make me who I am.